A little while ago, I actually made a video called "I Don't Know About Politics," where I basically try to explain little intermediate politics, and I got a little ahead of myself by talking about Congress. So I wanted to go ahead and just sort of backtrack on that a little bit because I went from talking about types of governments to talking about Congress using my five people in the House example. So you're just gonna have to bear with me here. Also, if I look sweaty, I'm not. I'm just hyper moisturized and it's getting darker outside, so the sun is going down. So the sun, you see how my hand is looking like this? My hand's not wet, guys. So, um, but yeah, let me just go ahead and get right back to the nitty gritty of what I was talking about beforehand. Um, all right, so we now know that there's certain. We now know that America is a democracy, which means that people vote for stuff. Like people vote for stuff like that, and America is also a republic because people can vote for people to represent them. Now, this is where things get a little complicated. Okay, there's a term. There's a words federal government. Federal government is a type of government, but because America uses the term federal government to describe our national government, I'm going to say federal government and use that as the system and use the term national government to refer to the American government. Okay, so national nation. Okay, just bear with me on that. But the national government, America, is a federal government, and the reason why it's a federal government is because we have a national government, which is a government that is in control of the entire country as well as all the states together, and then we have state governments, which is ultimately like if America were to ultimately dissolve, right? If America were to just say, you know what, these states are not states anymore, those states will be countries on their own because they will be countries on their own by American standards because they have the three branches of government. Um, but the fact of the matter is that there's a national government that is established by the Constitution, and then there's a state government which is also established by the Constitution. Which oddly enough, every state has their own constitutions, and the reason why is actually a lot more annoying than you'd expect. Okay, so um, let me go ahead and start off with a disclaimer here because I should have started off with that. I'm just some dude on the internet talking about stuff that I'm currently learning myself. I'm not going to get everything correct. Don't use me as a source. Don't be like, don't be like, oh my God, this dude is so smart. Like, I'm not telling you this so you can like look to me for answers. I'm telling you this stuff so you can have an idea where to start. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm going to tell you to consider to do your research. I'm not research. I'm researching myself, and I'm explaining to you what little bit I think I know. I'm going to get it wrong sometimes, but it's up to you to find out exactly what I got wrong, and up to you to figure out how to make it correct. I can't stress that enough, like seriously, like that, because I don't want nobody to be like, actually, you said this incorrectly because I don't care. I don't care. I'm just trying to help out people who don't know anything about this stuff. So just like if you're an expert on politics already, either don't come at me with the actually you're incorrect because I mean make your own video, bro. Like help these people out. People don't know a lot about civics, and it's an election year, so you don't criticize me for how I'm doing stuff. Do it yourself and help out the people in your community. That's all I'm trying to do right now. Well, if you don't know the stuff, then why are you talking about it? Because somebody has to. Moving along though. So as I've said before, in American government we have something called in American government we have something called the state governments and the federal government. By the rules of the Constitution is basically the rules of America. It's basically like if you ever had a video game and you opened up the container and you used to have the little instruction guide inside, which we still need those. Video gaming industry, why or did y'all take away instruction manuals? I love those. It's about politics, not about games, but it can be about both. Let me explain why in the future. Um, that's ultimately what the Constitution is. The Constitution is ultimately the instruction manual for America. It tells you what everything does, what everything is, and how everything goes. The only problem is that like it was written so long ago that like things have is written so long ago that like in the time that things have changed since the Constitution has been written, And for some strange reason, people are like, nope, sacred work, we can't change it that much. And it's like, yeah, but y'all already have changed it like 21 times, which is called the 21 Amendments. The 21 Amendments are certain moments in time where the Constitution was changed or modified or some to that effect. So it's like, it can be changed, but it requires like it requires like basically a whole bunch of political figures to agree that it should be changed in some fashion for it to change. So, but the Constitution basically declares that the American government is established by three branches of government: the judicial branch, the executive branch, and the legislative branch. And these three branches, the reason why is these three branches are the reason why America doesn't really have like a king or queen. To put this in perspective, and I know this is a very hard thing for some people to understand. The president does not run the country. The president is not king of America, which is kind of like the reason why is because if the president steps out of line, the House of Representatives can actually like challenge that and what's what I'm looking for, and impeach the president, which means impeaching. By the way, it doesn't necessarily mean that the president gets ousted as much as it means that the president gets put on trial. And the president gets put on trial. The judges are the Supreme Court, and I think the Senate is the jury. I'm not sure. I need to learn it. I need to learn about that a little bit more. But the fact of the matter is that like it's basically the way for them to sort of hold themselves accountable. The only problem is that like it can be a it can be a ridiculously like a biased jury, so to speak, because sometimes the Senate can just simply say they didn't do anything and just all of it just would have been for nothing. Am I right, Donald Trump? The fact of the matter is that like the fact of the matter is though is that like that is a thing that happens. But those are called checks and balances. When you hear about checks and balances, it's a financial term, but it's also a term that basically like shows that like the reason why we have three branches of government, so that way if anybody acts up, then somebody can actually like check them on that, so to speak, and balance out the power. The legislative branch is quite possibly the most important branch out of all three of them. Because the executive branch is ultimately kind of like like the figurehead. The legislative branch creates the laws and like sends the laws to the president. The president or the executive branch ultimately kind of signs off on the laws and declares that those laws are now laws, and the judicial branch enforces the laws. Okay, so it's like you got one creating the laws, one validating the laws, and one basically telling you what happens when the laws actually when the laws are actually broken. Now, and the thing that makes the state governments valid in this context is that the states also have this. Except in the in the case of the states, the executive branches aren't headed by the president of the state. The president of the state is called the governor. Okay. Well, Emmanuel, if the governor is in charge of the state and the president is in charge of the country, then who do I listen to? Both. I know it's complicated, but both. Well, what if the governor actually has a problem? What if the governor disagrees with something that the president says? You technically still supposed to like the president is the person who is in charge of the country, but if your teacher think about it like a school. The principal is basically the president of the school. We'll say that, and your teacher is ultimately the governor of the classroom. Like if your teacher tells you something and the principal tells you something different, you kind of have to take into consideration that like the principal might like it, you probably might have to listen to the principal, because whatever the teacher is going to do to you, the principal might be able to undo, or vice versa, or whatever. You see what I'm saying? The only problem is that in America is almost like not that. It's almost a little bit more complicated than that, because like the president has like so much to deal with that they probably might just forget about this one situation in this one place with this one person. It's a lot of people in America, dude. In any case, though, but the fact of the matter is that like the executive branch validates the laws, but they kind of do the least amount of work, so to speak. Also, if I'm looking like I'm scratching a whole lot, it's mosquito season, and I walk a lot of places, so yeah. I got bit I got a bit a bunch of times a day. But yeah, so the fact of the matter is though is that like you kind of got that going on. Is that so you have three branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. Now, the legislative branch is actually the most complicated branch. It's the most important one because they make the laws. The only problem is that like, the legislative branch has a lot of people up in it, and it only gets more complicated when you consider the states have their own legislative branches. You have two houses. It's called bicameral because it has two houses in there: the upper house and the lower house. The upper house is called the Senate. The Senate is basically like the Senate is basically headed by the senators who are normally like older people, and they represent every area like by two people. So like we have 50 states in America, two senators, 50 states, 100 senators. Whereas they're basically is basically the form of equal representation when it comes to like states or the cities. When it comes to like states or the cities and the city governments and the states government. Whereas in the House the House or the lower house, the House of Representatives is kind of based off of the size of the cities and states and stuff like that. So it can like I think the current number is 435 right now. I think it's 435 representatives, and historically, the House of Representatives is a madhouse, bro. People used to get in fist fights over there. They used to be like really crazy. Like if you look up history, they used to get like I think some people shot each other up in the House of Representatives before. Not saying that the Senate is any better, but it's like the House of Representatives is basically like considered is like kind of considered the children's house, or it's called the lower house for a reason. But that don't mean the Senate ain't any better. I mean, like we got Ted Cruz, man. Like, Tommy Tuberville. Y'all really got rid of Doug Jones for Tommy Tuberville. Alabama, what the but yeah, so there's a lot of, but yeah, like that's basically kind of how that goes. But it's like they're responsible. They're basically the people who get together and they negotiate laws and they discuss laws and negotiate laws and basically like get things put out on the floor. The only problem is that like you have to also take into consideration that there's a whole bunch of other terms that go in with being a congressman, such as lobbying and the congressional whip and all these other things. But you can go on Congress.gov and like find out some of those terms and learn a little bit more about it. But just know that the legislative branch in both the state and the national government level are ultimately just like they're responsible for the laws. The president is a person who is in charge of everything. The president is not everything, but the president is a person who validates the laws, and ultimately, it's kind of like the figurehead of America. They like the representative. If they like the representative. Once again, going back to our school example, you know what I'm saying? They're like, if anything bad happens at your school, it doesn't just make the teacher look bad. It doesn't just make you look bad, but it makes the principal look bad. If it makes the principal look bad, the principal represents the school. You see what I'm saying? I mean, you kind of gotta. So the fact of the matter is that like you kind of have that going on. But they're the figurehead and they're kind of responsible for like a lot of things. But they're not the smartest people. They're not the best people. I'm not gonna say that they're responsible for a lot of stuff. But like they don't know a whole lot of stuff. So they hire experts to kind of like surround them and explain to them why something has to be the way that it is. Those experts head the departments. So you have the Department of Education, which is headed by the person who you will probably go to for education. You got the Department of Agriculture, which is headed by the person that the president will go to if they have a question about agriculture. They basically have like if you think about it, there's a ministry or a parliament or something. But it's like ultimately, if they don't know something about what's going on, they can consult with these departments or the heads of the departments or the secretaries. I think that's what they're called, and actually kind of like get an idea as to what is going on. Sometimes they're headed by experts within their field, or in Trump's case, people who are actively trying to destroy those things from the inside. Jesus Christ, Betsy DeVos. But there's that. But that is ultimately kind of how that goes. Then they have the judicial branch, and the judicial branch is ultimately what happens if a person breaks the rules, or if there's like some sort of disagreement among the people. Like let's just say, going back to my 5 people 1 house example, you have 5 people 1 house. Like let's just say there is a disagreement, in there. So now everybody kind of has, there's a determination as to how they're going to handle the disagreement and what they're going to do about the situation. You know what I'm saying? So how you handle the disagreement, what you have to do, how does everything go, what happens if the person is found guilty, so to speak. That's ultimately all the judicial branch is. The problem is that like the judicial branch is divided by the cities. Is like I think it's called the circuits, or something like that. So it's like every city has their own circuit, and depending on and depending on how important or how complicated the case may be, it might go all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, by the way, is the court. In other words, if your case goes to the Supreme Court, it's quite possibly something that couldn't be handled by these other circuits and had to just keep going up the ladder until the situation goes about that. I don't know anything about the judicial branch as far as like the difference between civil cases and criminal cases or anything like that. I'm following the Trump case just like everybody else, and I'm kind of at the edge of my seat just trying to figure out what's going on. So, but the judicial system is ultimately, the judicial branch is ultimately what happens when after the law gets established, what guidelines are set out for it, what happens if somebody breaks it, and so on and so forth. And also on a national level, if the Supreme Court decides that a law is or isn't the way that it needs to be, they determine what happens determines what happens with that law on a national front. Everybody kind of has to follow that law. That's why it's called the law of the land, so to speak. Now, what about the state governments? You know what I'm saying? What if they do a national law and the state government has to do the opposite of that law? I mean, technically speaking, that it goes. It's a complicated political process that I don't know anything about, but I can't stress enough that specifically once you get these things, once you understand these basic things, it gets a little bit easier to understand. But I want y'all to understand this one thing, because everybody in the legislative branch is an elected official. You technically run the laws. You, as a voter, technically run American laws. In other words, you vote for legislative officials. You do that, and you can like modify them, or you could run. I mean, heck, you could run and get people to vote for you. I mean, either way, you know, the fact of the matter is that like you have power. Okay, legislative branches are like, you know, the legislative, like humans have the right to petition. Humans have a right to. I think you can oust a political figure, both using a legislative system and a judicial system, because you can use a legislative system and just kind of like, you know, I think petition for them to leave, or you could use a judicial system and if I'm not mistaken, I think sue them to get them out. I'm not sure how that goes, but the fact of the matter is that like the political process is very voter heavy, and that's why they're trying to take your votes away. They're trying to take your power to vote away because of that, because it's very, very, very voter heavy, and I can't stress this enough. Local and state governments are much more important than the national ones. The national election is once every 4 years, but voting season is every 2 years. You know what I'm saying? Between now and then, please pay attention to what you got going on, because now you kind of have an idea of what everybody does. Once again, the executive branch validates laws. The legislative branch creates the laws. The judicial branch enforces the laws. And almost all of those seats of power, almost all of those seats of authority, is are elected officials. Elected means that you vote for them. You vote for them. So get out and vote. Or if you don't want to vote, at the very least, learn about your system, because the more you know about your system, the easier it will be to change that system. Y'all be easy. I hope I made sense.